Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me. This is the morning market review with myself, Russell Shaw. I'm a senior market specialist at FXCM. My email address, rshaw@fxcm.com. Today is Monday, and it's the 8th of May. Just going to go ahead and bring up our disclaimers. Let's start off with the high-risk investment warning. I'll keep this on screen for a few moments. Okay, and here is our market commentaries disclaimer. And just finally, our references, so market scope and trading view. Let's just start off with the US dollar on market scope. And we're looking at the weekly chart here. And I'm still watching this topping pattern, or this potential topping pattern, because it's not a topping pattern until it completes. And it's only going to complete when it hits the neckline. So we've got a left shoulder, head, right shoulder. What's interesting is last week's price action. Last week's price action shows a fairly significant red candlestick, and what you can see is it looks as if there is a reference candle here. Okay, so the high there's 12,856. Yeah. So here is 2 weeks ago we've got the reference candle, and then last week we actually closed below the low of the reference candle. So a potential lower peak here. Okay, so I'm actually going to just label this as LP question mark. So a lower peak with this right shoulder here being the higher peak, and now a potential movement down towards the neckline. Take a look at the RSI. So we want to see where the RSI is relative to the 50. Is it on the bearish side or is it on the bullish side? And clearly here we can see it's on the bearish side of 50. And as long as we maintain below that 50 line, I think there's going to be pressure on the greenback, right? Now, let's go down to the daily chart. And this, again, a very interesting chart. What we did last week is we identified a squeeze on the Bollinger Bands. And now it looks like there is a expansion in that volatility. And the best way to see this is actually on the trading view platform, because they've got this Bollinger Band width indicator. So we looked at the Bollinger Band width. Let's just put in a line over there, and you can see it's very, very narrow. What Bollinger Band effectively does, it's the upper band minus the lower band divided by the lower band. I think that's the formula for it. The idea here is it's a very visual way to see how tight the squeeze is in the Bollinger Bands, and it's now starting to show signs of expansion. In other words, if we stay in zone 3 is the lower blue, the lower red, and those Bollinger Bands start diverging away from one another, we're getting that expansion in volatility, and it looks as if we may be getting a pattern completion here. So there is pressure on the US dollar. One of the reasons that I think there's pressure on the US dollar is actually the non-farm payroll that came out on Friday was actually a strong number. But what happened with that non-farm payroll is that there was restatements of the prior numbers, and those restatements were downwards. So there was actually indications of slowing in the numbers as well. It was hidden away. And the idea here is that the Fed probably near, if not at, the apex of its current rate hiking cycle. And you can see that the US dollar now perhaps starting to telegraph that and starting to come down towards the neckline of this head and shoulders. Now, if there is this expansion in volatility on the on the US dollar side of things. Let's just take a look and see what's happening on the euro side of things. Okay, so there should be some sort of positivity in the euro US dollar. Let's bring up that chart here. Okay, and what we have here is now a head and I beg your pardon, a higher trough, higher peak, a series of higher troughs followed by higher peaks. What I think is quite interesting is that we've managed to hold above the 110 for a few weeks now. And let's take this out. And it looks as if we've got some sort of stabilization here. And perhaps this is some sort of platform getting ready to attack higher prices. That would seem a distinct possibility, given that the US dollar looks as if it's starting to show some weakness. Take a look at the RSI for the euro US dollar, just sailing smoothly along between 50 and 80, and not showing any overbought. It's really, I think, quite comfortable in this uptrend, a series of higher troughs, higher peaks, and now this, let's perhaps call this a ledge, and perhaps setting up for some sort of movement there. Let's go down to the daily chart and see if there's any clues there. And there are some clues. You can see that it's now moved into zone 1. And let's take a look. Let's take a look at this with the Bollinger Band width indicator. So we'll bring up here euro US dollar. Okay, and now let's bring in the horizontal. So you can see we're getting now another tight squeeze on the euro, just as there was a tight squeeze on the US dollar. The US dollar looks as if it's resolving that squeeze into an expansion in volatility. Well, one would expect an expansion in volatility with the euro US dollar as well. So what we can keep an eye on here is two things. Number one, we can keep an eye on the Bollinger Band width indicator. We want to see it expand, move up. That should show the Bollinger starting to diverge from one another. If they're starting to diverge from one another, then we want to take a look at the zones. Where is the euro US dollar traveling in terms of the zones? And potentially walking zone 1 here. You can see as long as we get that expansion in volatility and we're in zone 1, well, I would expect some sort of movement to the upside, and I think that fits in quite nicely with the weekly trend, a series of higher troughs followed by higher peaks. Let's take a look at cable as well. Okay. I'm not sure what this area is. I had an update to my system last week, and I'll just check with the technical guys. But take a look at what's happening here with, it's broken out of this rectangle. It's moving upwards. Take a look at the RSI, not overbought, just as we say, sailing along smoothly between 50 and 80. And when we take a look at the daily chart, look what's happened here. We highlighted last week that there was an expansion in the Bollingers, again, expansion in that volatility, and it's walking zone 1. Let's just go through to the Bollinger Band width indicator here, GBP USD. Let's bring that up. Okay, and here is a really good example of what we're looking for. So here was the squeeze Here was the squeeze, a really tight squeeze, and now it's starting to move upwards. We're starting to get that movement up in the volatility. And which zone are we in? Are we in zone 1? Upper red, upper blue. So cable benefiting. Euro looks like it's held above that 110 on that ledge-like pattern. It's also showing a squeeze. What does a squeeze suggest? The squeeze suggests a precursor to an expansion in volatility. And if we have to go to the beginning of the analysis, it all starts with the US dollar. Okay, it's the first link in that chain of causality where the US dollar now showing signs of expansion. Which zone is it in? It's in zone 3, holding between the lower blue and the lower red band. So it seems as if money moving away from the US dollar. What's the US dollar? It's typically regarded as a safe haven. If money is moving away from a safe haven, let's take a look at the risk market. So let's bring up the German 30, the DAX, see what we can glean from the chain of causality, right? So let's bring up DAX. All right, let's start off with the weekly chart here. Higher trough, higher peak, higher trough, higher peak. So we've got a really good looking uptrend here. We've got a trend line measuring the momentum of the uptrend. Take a look at last week's candlestick. Last week's candlestick is really interesting. You had a period where the bears pushed price down to the low of the week. At the low of the week, the bears lose control. The bulls take over and push price right back up. Okay, this is called a dragonfly doji. That's what we have here. It's a bullish candle. You can see the bullish, you can see the buying tail here. Guess what? On the week before, buying tail. So we've got a nice thick band, even the week before, a nice thick band of support sitting right over there on the weekly chart. Let's go down to the daily, see what we can see here, and look at the squeeze. Okay, look at the squeeze here. Let's go back to trading view so we can take a look at it on the Bollinger Band width indicator. Okay, let's bring in the horizontal. So you can see here, here's the squeezes. I'm going to move it just slightly up here. So it covers squeeze, move, squeeze, move. Here's another squeeze. Which zone are we in? We're sitting really comfortably in zone 1. Last week, we saw on Friday this big movement up. Okay. Let's do the analysis on market scope. So we've got this big candle from last week on Friday. What we can do is put in an arrow here. Here's the reference candle, and here's the close above the reference candle's high. And what's happening with the momentum? The momentum's looking really interesting. Okay, it's again between 50 and 80. What did we notice last week? We noticed that the RSI was starting to hinge upwards. Is this hinge up? So we suggested, well, it did look as if there was a wane in the momentum, but potentially setting up for this expansion in volatility. Look at it in terms of zone 1. The longer it stays in zone 1, the higher the chances that we get a swing, and that swing would be in that northeasterly direction. There's one more chart I want to show you. That would be NASDAQ. And NASDAQ is very sensitive towards interest rates. Let's just bring NASDAQ up. Okay. Starting with the weekly chart. Again, one of my favorite charts here because there is a higher trough, higher peak, higher trough, higher peak, okay? And not only is there a series of higher troughs, higher peak, the momentum is shifting upwards. The momentum is shifting from green to orange, okay? So there is a increase in the momentum. What do we see? What do we see with RSI? It's sailing smoothly, smooth sailing between 50 and 80. Go through to the daily. Look at that squeeze. Okay, so let's go back to trading view and take a look at the Bollinger Band width indicator. Let's bring up NAS 100. Okay. Now look what's happening here. It's in zone 1. It's starting to expand. If the expansion continues with the Bollingers, that expansion, and we carry on walking in zone 1, well, that's interesting, isn't it? Now, what you can take a look, just like we saw the reference candle on the DAX, here's the reference candle on the NASDAQ. It looks as if money is moving from the dollar safe haven into risk stock market. And that's how we look to be starting the week. Let's keep an eye on that. It looks like a positive sentiment, a risk on sentiment to start the week. Let's see if it's got that momentum to carry through. And it looks as if we're getting that bullish expansion in volatility. All right. That's as far as we're going to go this morning. If there's any questions, please go ahead and type those in. Any questions, please go ahead and type those in. All right, nothing coming through. Let's conclude at this point. Please join me again tomorrow morning when we'll carry on looking at this risk on potential. Have a great day ahead, a good evening, and I'll speak with you guys tomorrow morning.